Okay, so now we're ready to talk about the sensor phase and sensor locks and sensor questions. So, if you have a sensor lock, you get to ask your opponent a question about how his ship is set up. So you go over here under Help menu, select Sensor Questions, and you get this nice list here. And this list is pretty self-explanatory. These are the questions you're allowed to ask, and then it also shows you the format that the answers need to be in. So for this example, I'm going to go ahead and ask, hey, what is the relative power allocation? And we'll go ahead and cut and paste that directly into here. And then when you get the log file, you will give me an answer to that, and the answer will be in the form of what shows here. So then you will say, hey, the order from greatest power to allotment to least in which the captain is allocated power to weapon, shields, and movement and cloak. So that's the information you give me here. And there's other questions you can ask too. Not all these questions are actually relevant. Like a lot of this stuff is for the role-playing game. Like if you ask me what race I am, I mean, hey, at this point it should be obvious I'm Klingon. But there's things that go on in the role-playing game where, hey, maybe the guy flying the Klingon ship may not actually be a Klingon, but we're not going to worry about that because it has no bearing on the actual starship combat. Most of the good stuff is down here in this additional information. Now, when we get into the advanced game, the class and type is important because, hey, you might have a Constitution class, but there are variants, and some of the newer variants might be more powerful than the older ones. So it kind of helps to know which class of ship you are dealing with. So is this a Constitution class Mark 1 or is it a Constitution class Mark 4? I don't know. That's where sensor questions come into play. So that's the sensor phase. And again, like say, you'll answer that when you play out the vassal log, when you get it. And we'll go to the next phase, movement. Now, moving here now, one thing I better backtrack here a moment here because I actually forgot to put the pieces on the board. So let me go ahead and put the pieces on the board real quick. Let me put my Federation ship here. Cruiser, Constitution, stick him right here. Rotate him around a little bit. And then I'll go ahead and also add a Klingon on here. Cruiser. Oops, that's a Romulan. I want a Klingon. Cruiser, D10, stick him over here as well. Okay. Now, just for reference's sake here, when you get the log file, the first log file from me, my piece is already going to be on the board. So one of the first things you do after you turn on the log file is you're going to put your piece on the board. And so don't forget that part. You got to put the pieces on the board. So there we go. We got the pieces on the board. We're going to move, and movement is the way it works is the guy who's moving the fastest moves first. Now at this point, at the start of the phase, we declare how fast we're moving. And of course, you wrote that down over here on your master control panel on movement points. So like with my Klingon, I mentioned for the example that I'm moving 10. And so you look at 10, well, gee, okay, how many hexes do I get to move at a movement points of 10? Well, we go back over here to the book 4, go down to the charts, look at the 5 movement phase chart. We're not using 3, we're using 5 movement phases. I have 10 points of movement right here. And that shows me that for phase 1, I get to move, I have 2 movements. Now, one thing that to keep in mind about movement in this game is 1 point of movement doesn't necessarily translate into 1 hex. Now, here, I'll show you how that works. So here's 1 movement. You notice how I can move like that, and that's a movement, and then I can move like a side slip. That's a separate movement. So this game is kind of odd in this regard, in that when you're doing your forward movement like that, you can actually move 2 hexes using 1 movement point. And if you actually look at like book, I think 2, there's a better detail and some diagrams of how that works. So I'd reference you there. But anyway, that's how the movement works. So there I go. And I've moved my 2 movement points. Made my 2 moves. Now, as far as moves go here, you can, say, everything you do in this game can be undone. So, like, I want to undo the move. There I am back there. And so I'm back where I started here. And then I can go ahead and undo my movement track. I clear it out. And let's say I wanted to do like that instead. Yeah. So that's the undo does. And all moves can be undone. And of course the undos get logged up here in the log. That's helpful in case you screw something up and you let your opponent know that, hey, you did something, you screwed up something. So that's the movement. And then again, when you get the log file and play it out, you'll do your moves as well and save the log file and send it back to me. So now there's different things you can do as far as movement. Like say you've seen like you can move straight ahead, and like this little move here I did to the side is called a side slip. You can also movement also comes in the form of doing turns. Like so you can turn in place. And you'll find that there are tactical reasons to do such a thing. Now one thing to bear in mind here, so if you choose to stand still, like not move, you can still turn your ship, but you don't actually have to move forward. You can just sit there and kind of spin, so to speak. And, you lose your movement for the phase, but you can still turn. It doesn't cost you anything to turn. So that's, and then, I'm thinking about it, backwards movement. Now backwards movement, you can do it, but this is space. You can't just stop on a dime and start moving backwards. It doesn't work that way. What you have to do, if you're going to move backwards, you need to not move at all for a phase. So you need one phase of no movement whatsoever. That means turning too. So you're just sitting still for one phase, and then in the next phase, you can start moving backwards. And you'll find there are some tactical advantages to moving backwards. Although, odds are you probably won't use it that often, but just be aware that it's there. So that is our movement phase. So moving on, firing phase. Number one most important thing about firing phase is you must declare whether or not you are firing or choosing to withhold your fire. You have to decide before you even determine which weapons you're going to fire. You have to make a choice now whether you're going to shoot or not shoot. And you're kind of, and to be perfectly honest, you're doing this a bit in the dark because, hey, if you're the guy that's going to be receiving fire, you don't know how much fire is coming in. So you need to decide whether you're going to use your weapons before they get destroyed, or withhold fire and hope that you can use them later. That's really up to you. So now the way that is represented here is we go ahead to generic pieces. You'll see a fire and no fire counter. So if you choose to fire your weapons, I'm going to choose to fire my weapons, I drop a fire token or fire counter on my ship. That's fire. If you choose not to fire, you would come back along and drop a no fire token. One point of reference, if you forget the no fire token, you send me a log file without a no fire token, that by default is considered a no fire. So, oops, we don't go back and redo history. No time warps here. And so, okay, on the next segment, we're going to go ahead and go into how the actual firing sequence works.